Hey, Marrita, thanks for your work in week two. Just want to send you a quick video reply here. I love what you're saying in the the latter part of this second forum that the justice of God, the righteousness of God is not finally a what, but a who. The justice of God is a embodied power. It is Jesus. And I think that's absolutely right. And because of that, I would say then it can't be merely a moral code, because Jesus is not just rules or words that guide human conduct. Jesus is a living presence. And this, for Paul, needs to qualify how the audience uses God's rules, God's law, as well as the other parts of God's law. It's not about separating the righteous from the unrighteous. The law doesn't do that. Instead, the law is about the path that God's people receive from God so that they can learn uh, how to love God and to love one another. And they do this partly by failing and receiving God's mercy, which the law actually provides, and in that way learning who God is, and what it means to serve God in the world. So that's how I think I would try to build on that insight that you've got. Um, you have a totally appropriate here disagreement with me about um, what these two paragraphs, 118 to 32, are about. And so I just want to try to clarify where I'm coming from and see if we can converge a little bit more than we have. I agree that Paul holds all of the human to be sinful. So I don't want to deny that. That's not my point. My point is, what is the purpose for which Paul is teaching the audience that all of the human is sinful? I don't think that its purpose is merely to establish that fact. Instead, I think its purpose becomes explicit in the argument itself in Romans in chapter 2, verse 1. Who then are you, O human being, that you would judge or rule over others as if you were righteous and others were not? Because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So I think the key here is the point that Paul is driving at in showing the universal sinfulness of the human. I don't think it's merely to establish that fact, but to show how that universal sinfulness of the human keeps any human being or human community or a group from acting as the judge who rules over others. Instead, what he's saying, as I understand it, is that God's revelation is of God as the judge and empowers the human to trust God to be the judge, the ruler of the human. And this kind of faith in the God who is faithful actually cultivates a life of loving God and loving one another. Whereas when people invoke God's law or anything else about God's revelation to pose themselves as the judges or the righteous rulers of others, it actually tears people apart and tends to prioritize some people, some groups of people over others and at the expense of others. And so that's what I take Paul to be addressing. I don't know if that helps us converge a little bit, but just want to try to clarify where I'm coming from. You got some good stuff in Forum 1. Um, Sometimes a little bit hard for me to follow what you're writing, but I think I get it for the most part, and I appreciate your engagement with the secondary sources. One thing to look out for is sometimes the secondary sources will describe the position or the tendency that they want to oppose. And so we don't want to attribute to the source that we're reading the position that they want to oppose. We want to recognize that they're saying, okay, here's what I'm going to be arguing against. So, for example, where they say, this is the beginning of your response in part two, Judaism is portrayed as everything Christianity is not, legalistic, ethnic, particular, limited, and so on. This is what Kimberbell and Johnson Hodge are opposing, is that sort of portrayal of Judaism, and especially deriving that portrayal from Romans. This is not, at least as they are arguing, how Paul understands his Jewish life, what it means to be a Jew. They're arguing for a different way of making sense of what Judaism is about, according to Paul. So, just as you're interacting with secondary sources, try to be on the lookout for when they are articulating what they are opposing versus when they are stating their own responses, their own views that they're attempting to defend. Thanks again for your work in week 2, Marrita.